Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Post-fight review, David Adeleye vs Emir Ahmatovic. And this was, fair to say, a bit of a scrappy, messy fight where David Adeleye showed flashes, but ultimately wore down his opponent, Emir Ahmatovic, who retired after 5 rounds, or was retired by his corner after 5 rounds. But honestly, Ahmatovic was sending out pretty bad signals in that 5th round, looking like he was pretty much spent and wanted to be anywhere else but the ring. But as I said in a video a week ago when I sort of mentioned this fight and the opponent being confirmed as Ahmatovic, that, you know, he would be game. And we saw flashes of that from him. But for the most part, David Adeleye, I think based off his last performance against Dimitri Bizos, where Bizos came to fight and they were trading and David Adeleye absolutely waxed him with a left hook, a lot of people, probably including myself, were expecting a bit more of a polished performance in this one to show that progression. But I guess with a prospect who advanced to 12-0, you're going to have some ups and downs, and I think we saw that. David Adeleye started well in that first round, the quick jab, and that jab was really messing up Ahmatovic, pushing him back, rocking the head back, and ultimately doing a bit of damage to both eyes. But for whatever reason, Adeleye went away from the jab, and I think in part that could have been because Ahmatovic decided that he would sort of stay at range, and he was a bit more cautious and wasn't engaging as much. But the problem then being David Adeleye wasn't really doing much. So he wasn't throwing the jab. You had a situation sometimes where for several seconds, multiple times every round, where they're just kind of looking at each other, not doing much. And for most of the rest of the time for some of these rounds, there might be a short attack which turned into some scrappy inside action where not a lot clean was landing. And if anything, a bit of fouling by David Adeleye, who was getting away with it from the ref. Was warned for hitting to the back of the head, using the forearm, also hitting and holding, and that was something that was a feature through the fight, where he would use one arm to hold Ahmatovic and then try to belt him with the other. So, I mean, he probably needs to tidy up on some of that stuff, but making the fight seem to be a little bit of a problem at times for Adeleye, who you could clearly tell wanted to use the right hand and the left hook as counters, but he wasn't getting the opportunities, and as a result he wasn't really doing much else. Although Ahmatovic had a habit, when they did sort of clash, he would sort of dip down, and David Adeleye was landing some uppercuts, and actually an uppercut in the 3rd round, probably one of the best punches of the fight, apart from those jabs early on that rocked the head back. But you could see that Ahmatovic was starting to wilt, and after that 5th round didn't want it anymore, or his corner, threw in the towel. But I think, it was by agreement with the fighter as well. So one of these performances where you go, yeah, okay, it was what it was. You saw flashes of the talent, especially early, but I think one thing I'd like to see David Adeleye do more, and I think this is something we've said earlier in his career, is just work a little bit harder. I think sometimes when there's not a lot happening and his opponent isn't giving him much, he's got to create opportunities. Use his footwork, which the commentators keep telling us how fantastic it is. Show us that he's got good footwork. Start to create some angles and start to open up his opponent. Because against this level of opponent, he can do that. He needs to be in there, trying some things out that he's been working on in the gym, not just looking for counters, which was, a feature of that early performance against Kamil Sokolowski, where he looked decidedly average. Certainly he's improved since then, but there were just moments here where you're like, you got to do a bit more. Maybe because it was 10 rounds and perhaps because he thought his opponent was durable, he was just conserving himself. I don't know. He was a career heaviest, 235 pounds. And for a guy that's already quite muscle bound, maybe he's quite conscious of, his energy usage, and that if he really lets his hands go and empties the tank, that he could be in trouble. So-so performance overall. Like I say, flashes. After the fight, he was asked about his performance, and he said he still got to find his feet on the big stage, that he did want to blitz his opponent, and that he's got to go back to the gym and work on some things. And he was actually asked in terms of the next opponent, and the interviewer pushed him a number of times, does he want to fight for the British title, fight Fabio Wardley? And he said, look, if it makes sense, yeah, sure. And then he gave a message for Fabio Wardley saying Fabio can go kiss where the sun don't shine. It was a little bit more, but I didn't catch it. But that was the gist of it. I mean, I think the thing is, at this stage, I think Adeleye is still a little bit raw, and I think Fabio Wardley probably beats him right now. David Adeleye is a confident character, and I'm sure he's got different views on that, but based on what we saw in there against the guy who had a bloated record, who, despite the commentators going on about his power and all this sort of stuff, Ahmatovic wasn't really a threat. He wasn't a threat against Filip Hrgovic when he got stopped in 3 rounds. I think the case is that it's good matchmaking for David Adeleye at this point. There's a reason they're throwing up relatively obscure European heavyweights. They want to make it look like, these guys that he's facing are dangerous, that they're, on par with him. But they're developmental fights. That's really what they are. It was the same for Hrgovic when he fought Ahmatovic, who was unbeaten at the time. I mean, no one gave Filip Hrgovic any credit for fighting this guy. Everyone said it was a mismatch, but I guess we had higher expectations for Hrgovic at the time. I still think, in terms of, the development, this fight is fine. I mean, David Adeleye is still relatively raw. He's a work in progress, and he needs rounds, and he needs different scenarios. And I guess this was another one where, his opponent made an adjustment early, decided that he wasn't going to engage as much and box from the outside. And we didn't really see maybe the adjustment that we needed to see. And we probably had to see David Adeleye being a bit more busy, double up the jab, or at least throw the jab at all. He seemed to be a little bit bereft of ideas at times. But, this is part of the development process. But he was sparring in the United States again, and also out in Puerto Rico. So he's getting some good experience, some good rounds in the gym. And I think he's cognizant of the fact that, he's got more work to do. And he even said that. But it is a case, I think, probably after this sort of performance, he was expecting a lot of himself and maybe didn't quite deliver, that, he's got to go away, work hard and continue. And I do expect, despite all this talk about Fabio Wardley and all that sort of stuff, they will continue sort of plotting their own course with David Adeleye, especially now he's got this WBO, European heavyweight title, whatever it is, trinket. They're just going to keep pushing that for a few more fights. I think the next year you'll have slow incremental steps before he starts stepping up to what we might consider fringe level, or anyone with a real pulse. Let's face it, Emir Ahmatovic was careful matchmaking. It was an opponent designed to give him some rounds, but ultimately still highly beatable. And that's exactly what we got. So from that standpoint, good development fight, nothing more. What do you make of it all? What do you make of the performance by David Adeleye? Were you impressed at times? What's he got to work on? Where is his real level? How far can he go? Because at the moment, he's a little bit up and down. Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.